Good evening, everyone. It's good to be back in front of the mic. My name is D. Holkey, and you know the drill by now at this point of the season. Welcome to Fantasy Overwatch Underground. Today, there's not a lot to talk about the last week that was highly surprising. Things that are going to change the way you look at fantasy, at least on a player-by-player basis. You know, I pride myself on good, or at least mediocre player analysis. Let's be honest, mediocre player analysis. And so today, I'm instead going to look forward ahead to the Royales that are coming up. I've got some thoughts on how we can try and optimize for those based on, really, this is more of a meta conversation than anything else. So I will intro today with some important player news in case you need to make some late season pickups here. After that, I'll jump straight to schedules and meta and Royales. And even if you don't play Royales, there's a little bit here for everyone on what you can learn from matchups. So, fantastic, entertaining matches, such as the Rain against the Fuel. But let's be honest, we know these teams, we know these players. There's not too much here YouTube-wise to go through. So, not here to waste your time. I'm here to get every drop of fantasy analysis that I can for you. So, thanks for tuning in. Let's go. While I play some lovely Shock versus Eternal footage where we watch the best flex support in the league go up against Violet. That's right. I'm only kidding mostly, right? Khan had an insane week. He's been looking really, really good. But that aside, let's go through some player news here while we run this footage in the background. First, Kalios joins the New York Excelsior from Korean Contenders. He has been a solid player. You know that I'm behind on my knowledge on Contenders, so I'm not going to pretend like I know something here. Bianca has visibly been struggling all season after some high hopes for him at the start of the year. I don't think you pick up a player at this point in the year to not play them. I think we're going to see some Kalios try and fix some of the tank woes for the Excelsior. I think he's startable. Little bit of risk, not too much though. Some drama in the Chengdu Hunters camp. Unfortunately, the casualty here is that Elsa is retiring, at least for now. That means they're left with one off tank on the roster, Late Young. I do think that means he's worth a pickup. Not highly confident that he comes in and is highly effective on anything besides Zarya, but he's all they've got. Maybe my dream comes true of seeing a little bit of Ameng and Gaga at the same time with some crazy ball comps. But Late Young is, he's worth a pickup if you're hurting at tank. Shockwave, he's finally practicing with the Fusion, and we'll talk about him in the Royale section. He's super interesting. I love him as a player. Who knows about integration? Who knows what kind of shape he's in? But he is, he's worth considering pickup-wise as well. As far as painful points of the week, Funny Astro and Toby split time, so Astro is not startable. And hey, the checkmate experiment. Oh man, everybody's loving it. I'm not. It has been ugly to watch. It's not looked good. Everyone memeing on OG. I don't know what's going on with the team, but checkmate did not look good. I'm not even going to pretend like I liked any aspect of what I saw. That even his Orisa or Reinhardt were okay. No. I'm not going for it. They caught Dallas by surprise. I think that surprise is done. At least we don't see Florida for another month. I hope they figure things out. Sucks. Yeah, that's that. Let's move along here. Overwatch League's weekly grab bag is always a good read, but this time in particular, I was coming up with the concept for this show on Monday, and if we go down, they have a really nice chart here, better than anything I would have given you for the Summer Showdown hero usage on West versus East. Keep this in mind as you're building out your rosters for Royales, even your weekly fantasy rosters. There's a huge difference with the heroes bolded here on who's playing in the West versus who's playing in the East. Always good to know. But from a fantasy perspective, what I want to point out here, nothing so much on the tank side of things. If we go to supports, BAP is always outscoring, almost always outscoring your Zens and your Anas. So I feel like you're hard throwing if you have a halfway decent flex support on the western side of things, and you're playing your eastern support over him. Yeah, if it's, if you're talking about like Rolf versus Jonak, go with Jonak, right? But if we're talking mid-tier BAP versus high-tier Zen, West versus East, you got to go with the West. For Royale, same thing. Get your BAP players in there, especially the ones with a sprinkling of Moira, if you can. Damage side of things, really the Mei players are to watch out for, as well as the Symmetra players. We know Symmetra scores quite well, so if you can find someone who's playing a lot of Symmetra, McCree, and Tracer in the West, or a lot of Tracer in the East, definitely some interesting looks there. But overall, I think that flex supports is the biggest implication for fantasy. But even more so than that, we actually need to go team by team. So what I'm going to spend most of the rest of the time doing is going team by team, how their schedules look for the week, as well as how they specifically are playing the meta. Because even as we look at this big picture, there are some teams that are really, really following this. And there are other teams who are going off meta, counter meta in a lot of different ways. So just because you have these broad brushstrokes here as far as what's going to happen, and you think, oh, I'm going to slot in this player in the West because they're going to play some Tracer or they're going to play some BAP. That's not necessarily the case. So we're going to go in a little bit more detail, team by team. Being the dusty old fart that I am, I like to use text files for tracking my notes. Here I have my matchup tiers for the week with a few random notes as well. Feel free to grab a quick screenshot if you'd like to. Some of these notes are outdated, but the tiers are not. I don't love any team's matchups this week. I have no A tier matchups. I do have some D tier matchups, which are typically the ones that I try to avoid. Lots of B's and C's. So Royale-wise, league-wise, I'm generally trying to start my players from Houston, Dallas, and the Gladiators. A lot of teams here are a toss-up, and I'm avoiding the Spark, Dragons, and of course, always avoiding the Valiant, and in this particular week, avoiding the Hunters as well. So I'll be running down this list schedule-wise, the teams I like the most, and as I move along this video, I'll gradually get to teams that I like less. So let's start with the Outlaws. This week, they've got Boston and Dallas. Boston may not actually be great with their 2-0 start, easy schedule, but, it shouldn't be a complete roll, although I think Houston looks really strong. But the Dallas-Houston matchup should hopefully create enough value for the Outlaws to sustain a strong fantasy week, even if there's a mediocre to weak performance against the Uprising. So here we have Piggy fluxing. Really nice Maywall from Dante. All things that you expect. They really took it to the shock this week, and after two really close maps, they rolled them the next two. And we saw a lot of Piggy on Sigma. From the diagram we were looking at before, Sigma is not highly common, and Piggy is playing a ton of it. The Outlaws are actually one of those off-meta teams. We saw a lot of Orisa Sigma and almost no Reinhardt Diva. And they generally avoided some of the Mei Symmetra comps, although they ran a fair amount of it themselves. It's really their tank line that is different, and that means we can capitalize on that. Good matchups. Piggy on the Sigma, loving that, and I think we got a new piece of content here. All right, by this time, I'm terrible at memeing, and you also know that I really, really want nicknames for players. We've done a horrible job nicknaming players, and here I've got some Star Fox 64 footage for you. Loved this game when I was a kid, and man, Pigma. Pigma is the man. One of these mini bosses you come across. You got Piggy. He plays the Sigma. Pigma comes to mind. Most annoying voice. I don't know about all the... I don't want to play sounds and get in trouble for it. All that good stuff. Go Google Pigma Nintendo 64. You'll get some really, really annoying quotes. So, I'm calling Piggy Pigma from here on out. I apologize in advance. I've got a new dashboard that I created this week that I've been using to look at player composition. So the different colors indicate different heroes played here, and we're checking team by team. So as I've noted here, Piggy has an inordinate amount of Sigma. His price in Royale is expensive at 75, but it's worth it this week. There's ways where you can make it happen. So I almost feel like Piggy is a must start in Royales. And in your leagues, if you own him on your teams, I think he's the #1 tank for the week. I like the Outlaws enough this week that if you're trying to save on budget, I think going the Piggy Jangu tank line is also doable. Not that I think Jangu will score that well on Orisa, but if the Outlaws have an interesting and high scoring week, then Jangu should have a mediocre week, or, maybe even a decent week. But he's a nice filler to help you save on budget if you're really hurting and want to fit in somewhere else. I don't think it's necessary this week because of some of the really cheap players that are out there, but I do think it's a very viable strategy, and I will be running Jangu in at least one Royale this week. Happy's also pretty reasonably priced. He's not cheap. He did play a fair amount in the Symmetra. The Widowmaker was a big fail on Junkertown. It's always possible. He's cracked on the hero, but I don't know that we see him on there again. And with the McCree Hanzo rounding it out, I think Happy might be, he's not cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but he is affordable. That's it for the Outlaws. Can't really go wrong with any of these guys. Crimzo, extremely expensive. With some of the other things coming up here in the next few minutes, you'll see I love Crimzo this week, and I have him starting in a bunch of Royales as well. Very briefly, I wanted to bring up the Dallas Fuel. We know what to expect from the Fuel by now. Every single one of their guys is very startable in Royales if you can afford them. In playing Houston and then Toronto, much like the Outlaws, they've got one great matchup and one mediocre to poor one. I do think I'm avoiding Doha everywhere just because of the huge amount of May that he played and that we would expect him to continue to play. Although he does round it out with some Symmetra, also some Sombra, which you don't love to see. So I'm avoiding Doha. Everybody else feels pretty startable as long as you can afford them. Minor risk here on Sparkle. I absolutely loved watching his Doomfist. Looks so good on the hero. Always has. I hope he always will. Outside of that, not too much to talk about here on Dallas. Jumping over to the Gladiators stats, there are a few interesting things here. Really one that I'm focusing on. They played the first week. They did not play this last week. So they were around when there was not so much a read on the meta. They played a heavy amount of Sombra, which led to a very mediocre week for Birdring in Fantasy. If this is in the East, I expect more Sombra, and I don't think I'll see a lot. I don't think I want Birdring in my lineups. Considering this is West, and we've seen a huge shift away from Sombra in the last week, and teams like Dallas, who are the meta, are likely defining it for other teams, there's a possibility we see a huge switch here, and Birdring being the hit scan player for the team, he might end up playing a lot of that Symmetra. A little bit of a risk. We've seen plenty of shifting from Kevster on the Tracer, on the Genji. Mirror's played some Doomfist and Echo. You never know. They could bring in Mirror on the Symmetra. Tough to say. And if we look over the course of this season on this one, and we're trying to look at heroes for, for them, the Symmetra is a little bit hard to predict for this roster. So if they do swap to that Symmetra, who knows who's playing that? Not a hero that's been in their wheelhouse very much this year. Even as it's been run map to map by some teams, a tiny bit of it from Birdring, maybe somewhere else in here. Can pop out the Symmetra graph here and try and check. More Birdring than anything else. I think he's your best shot, but maybe I'm almost talking myself out of the Gladiators running the Symmetra. That said, I don't think we see as much Sombra from Birdring. I do think there's a decent possibility he's once again, he's not super cheap, but I do like him for his current value, and I could definitely see myself running a serious amount of Birdring this week. I have currently got him slotted into some of my Royales as well. Moving on to our C lineup teams where I don't love their matchups, but I probably will have some of them anyway. Here we've got the Fusion struggling a little bit with the Charge, who look a little bit revitalized. No current dealings with the charge here, and I always look for excuses to put some Choi So-won clips on the screen as one of my favorite players this year. That said, we've got some interesting looks for the Fusion. They completely benched Carpe this last week, actually almost completely benched Carpe. Let me pull up their stats here to make sure I am not fudging any more than I just did. So, caught myself in a lie there already. We saw a lot of EQO and a lot of Rascal, and Carpe was their tertiary DPS for the last week. We also know that Shockwave is rejoining the team and is now practicing with them as of a couple of days ago. Shockwave is my swing for the fences. I might strike out hard, but I'm going to put him in some Royales just for the heck of it. He's the minimum price of 20, and in that APAC meta, he fits the tracer-sized hole that we're looking at here on this roster. If we pull the Grav Bag chart back up and we see the Tracer, Sombra, McCree, Ashe, May setup here, and we go back to their chart for the week, we've got EQO, who is really their only Sombra player. He was filling on the Tracer where he looked pretty bad. Rascal, as always, the jack of all trades. We know he can run any one of these things, and he has been their Tracer player so far this season. But if this team continues going Sombra Tracer, Shockwave did historically play that hero. Not a ton, but he did so pretty competently in 2020, where we saw a lot of hit scan, a lot of echo, and some of that Tracer. I don't have any old Tracer clips of his today, but I do like his Tracer, and I think there's a real possibility that he comes in and fills out that Tracer position. Still definitely possibility that Rascal is running that position as well, or that they continue to shake things up as they try and find their footing. Really tough to decide what to do with Philly this week, but hey, I'm going to swing for the fences at least once on Shockwave, because why not? Definitely a possibility that EQO gets benched somewhere in there too. He is looking to be their Sombra specialist. We could maybe potentially see Shockwave fill that, even though he hasn't played the hero historically really much at all, considering he was on the Titans where Suna did that in 2020. A whole lot of I don't knows from me. Moving along to the Boston Uprising, they play Houston and Atlanta. And there's a few here really good values. I'll start with IM37 at only a price of 61. He was playing a lot of McCree. He played a little bit of Reaper and Symmetra. So even if Boston kind of continues this slightly off meta McCree heavy level of play, there's not really any chance that he switches over to the May. So I like his value a lot this week. IM37 is not an extreme bargain at a price of 61, but he's one of those guys that when you're just trying to find a solid DPS to fill out your lineup, and you've got a little bit to spend, he's perfect for that this week. I'm slotting him in a lot. We did see not so much of Gay Bolshi and a lot of Punk. They are both extremely cheap this week, so Punk is well worth a dice roll, because after Boston went 2-0 last week, even if it was against an easier schedule, he looked pretty good, and I think we could see, 2 weeks ago, not last week, I think we could see a fair amount of Punk here. Still, though, pretty risky, considering at any given time he could be benched by GBS. I'll be quick here on New York and London. There's nothing extremely groundbreaking. I'll put the stats up on here for New York for you in case you'd like to see them. The main thing here is Kalios. So Kalios is the minimum price of 20. Once again, as I said in the opener, I don't think you pick him up to not play him at this point in time. They've had a little bit of time to integrate him into the practice, and I am plugging and playing Kalios in a lot of places because with that price of 20, he makes a lot of other things possible. I'm not going with him in every single lineup because I'll feel dumb if he doesn't play and all my Royales are bad, but I think I'll have him in over 50% of my Royales. DPS-wise, the Excel are in a rough spot because so far Flora has looked like their best Sombra as well as their best Tracer. They can't clone the dude. So if we continue to see the Tracer Sombra, the Tracer position is really up for grabs where Feather's been playing a lot. And historically, we've seen Ivy on the hero, but I think Feather could provide a little bit of value. maybe Excel just really try and stick to the Ashe poke comps too. I don't know. I don't love any of their DPS this week. And frankly, like I said before, you're throwing if you put in any of those Eastern flex supports. I know Jonak is back on the Zenyatta and you want it to work, but he just frankly has not looked amazing enough, especially with all the Baptiste play out there already. Said I'd be quick, and here I am still rambling. London, I'll put them up on the screen. Not much to say here. I think we know this team. They're starting to punch above that bottom tier and maybe have a chance to pull off a win. But unfortunately, they've got a pretty tough lineup this week with Atlanta and Washington. Speaking of Washington, they have now regularly looked really poor in their first matchup on any given tournament schedule, and they've started to look really good in that second week. Here we see a first death from Decay, which if I put in slow-mo, it is a painful one to watch. We know Decay has a ton of talent, but a lot of concerns here. He comes through the teleporter and it's gone. They can't get the timing right and he's dead. The fight is over before it's even started. Not that this is a bad individual play from Decay, but we did see a lot of first deaths from him due to poor coordination on the Washington front, not being able to execute simple things like putting your teleporter in a safe location where your team will not immediately die when they try to come through. Washington's been an interesting one. So they have London, they have the Gladiators this week. There's no individual player Royale-wise that sticks out because I think they were pretty much on the meta, so the players' values are not likely to have a significant change. It's really just if you want to bet on Washington turning it around this week like they did last tournament cycle. Who knows? They're interesting, though. I'll have one or two of them in lineups, but they're not really a value here, and I'm not in love with them this week. Next on deck, I've got Toronto. I really wanted to find some value here for you. I really tried, but I can't do it. The thought being, when you look at their lineup, we know that in the first week, they played all Aspire on a heavy amount of Tracer and a lot of Hisu with a heavy amount of Sombra. This looks a lot more like an APAC meta here, where instead of going with the Zenyatta, they went with Ana. They had a very different read than the other teams in the West did, and I think we could see them pivot. I think Lastro is a little bit of a value because with how much Ana he played, if he switches to BAP, his price will be a little bit of a steal. So Lastro's a good plug and play for this week when you're placing the bet that he switches from Ana over to BAP and that Toronto is at least able to make matches somewhat competitive with a tough Gladiators fuel lineup. You would think that because of the prevalence? Can't think. Sorry, my English is bad. With how much May has come in, maybe we'll see some Neist this week. If they pivot away from the Sombra look and go more with the May, it becomes a question of, hey, are they playing the Symmetra there? And if we once again go to this team and look at the Symmetra play, who knows? Hisu can run it. We don't know if Aspire can or not. This guy would not surprise me if he could run it very well. I don't know that if Neist comes in, who plays alongside him? Is it Hisu or is it Aspire? I would guess Hisu, but man, Aspire's looked good lately. So I think Hisu and Aspire are both a little bit too risky. And frankly, Neist, having not played last week, his value didn't dip at all. So none of those three DPS are values. And if I'm looking for anyone to play on Toronto, it is almost assuredly Lastro. Last but not least, we've got Atlanta. They are playing against London and Boston, and they might just roll both of these matchups. They have looked really good this last week, and Edison is part of that. He had a really strong week. I'm too late, I was on the Edison train before the season began. He did have a really strong fantasy performance week. I shouldn't say really strong because unfortunately he did miss one whole map, having Kai came in briefly, and Edison was on the McCree. And he looked, with Atlanta looking like one of the best teams in the West, Edison is no doubt a part of that. Pelican is still this team's alpha dog, which sounds so funny to say when you have Kai on the roster. But, man, this team is looking nasty, and they are at their nastiest with Edison and Pelican in there right now. Jumping over to the stats, there's not too much to overthink here. Pelican will not be extremely valuable given his price just because of how much time he is going to put in on the May, most likely. If we're looking for tank lineups, Hawk has once again looked good. He also had a smattering of Sigma, which makes him that much more valuable. I don't really have a lot of him in Royales this week under fear of them crushing London and Boston. Otherwise, I think Hawk and Gator would once again be an interesting tank duo lineup. And then Edison, playing only the valuable stuff here. Reaper, Symmetra, McCree. That's allowing Kai to focus on the Ashe and just a little bit of McCree. In short, when they play poke comps, Kai will be in. They're running a lot less poke, a lot more Maze Symmetra Brawl, which means Edison has some short-term value here. I just don't think this is the week to run it. They're good enough right now that they can play around with some different compositions, and I can't trust the DPS lineup as a result. Pelican has yet to sit, so if he's in your season-long leagues, you really can't drop him, but he's not my favorite for Royales this week. That said, Pelican is one of the, he's been fantastic this year. My preseason video, I tried to hype him up a fair amount. I don't know that I ranked him well enough to reflect that just because of how much I've loved Edison as well. Such a sick lineup. I had high expectations for him. He's outperformed even what I was expecting. And man, what a player. He's busting out the Doomfist, world best Echo. He's looked really good on the May, although not in this particular play against the Fuel. But loving Pelican's play. Had to give him a quick shout out there. I think that will about do it as we get to our outro here. Want to say thanks for tuning in. As always, I really enjoy making this content. I hope you enjoy watching. And with there being less fantasy relevant stuff happening this week, I wanted to get into the Royales again because I love doing that. I feel like anything else would have been a little bit of a waste of time, and we're here to improve our fantasy game, not to just watch clips and hash things out. So I definitely hoped you learned a thing or two today. Hope it's helpful in finalizing those Royale rosters, and hoping you hit every single one of your shots this week. Good luck. Have a good week. Enjoy watching a long weekend of Overwatch, and I will talk to you all soon. Have a good one.